Hey everybody, it's Old Fart, your old buddy. How you doing? Well, welcome to video number 420. That's right.
Greetings, YouTubers, and greetings to any of you welfare recipients who might be just getting up and getting started on the day. It's going to be another detailed response to a lot of Old Fart Rants' talking points. Again, I must reiterate, this guy has a lot of free time. He's basically had tons of free time since he got on YouTube, and since I've been refuting him, he's had a lot more free time. This guy's he's become basically a YouTube vegetable. I've never seen anybody spend so much time online telling everybody what they're doing when they're not online. But we got a whole. He puts so much stuff up. Old Fart Rants is a lot like people like Jackass Glenn or Jacqueline Glenn or whatever its name is, and Onion Son or whatever is some other guy named Onion Son. I liken them to like a giant toilet that runs in reverse constantly, throwing so much crap out that you can't possibly scoop up all of it. And that's kind of what he is. So he uses his free time to just try to yell over everybody and just throw so much crap at the wall, seeing how much will stick. But I think I'm undermining his videos are getting even more and more generalized lately. So I'm starting to hem him in where he won't make a lot of talking points, that it's all this generalized crap, even more than it was years ago. So the first talking point that old brown teeth belched forth years ago that I've heard, and he still continues to belch it, vomit it out of his pie hole on a regular basis. The belief that the 1950s were an economic golden age because taxes were high. Well, he omits a lot of items, such as, and the two videos coming up on your screen will debunk all this. This is detailed stuff. This isn't kiddie level get the crayons out and fill in the spaces type of work. Just a few things. He doesn't cover the labor force participation rate. He doesn't cover the fact that the national debt continued to go up despite these stratospheric income tax rates every year but 3. I'll even leave a link to the Old Fart Rants Bernie Sanders challenge, which dovetails with this. Where Old Fart Rants refused to defend Bernie Sanders' penchant for wanting higher tax rates to balance the budget. It won't work. He doesn't cover the out-of-wedlock birth rate. He doesn't cover comparing over many decades the income tax rate on millionaires adjusted for inflation. He doesn't cover the growth of federal transfer payments to individuals. Our government's become a giant ATM machine. He would probably assume that the Pentagon budget has grown exponentially, but actually against the 1962 to 81 base period, the Pentagon budget has shrunk relative to the budget en masse. That doesn't mean there's things we can't cut. But basically, Old Fart Rants' tripe that the 1950s were an economic golden age because of high tax rates is complete and total BS. So I also remember in this video I'm going to play some clips. Now he goes into a bipolar rage several times and just starts engaging in profanity-laced tirades. So you'll just have to put up with that. If you're greatly offended at it, you can just try to skip past it or mute it. But he has quite the hissy fits in his videos. So you'll just have to deal with that. But anyways, see those two videos which debunk it, and now we'll move on to other items. We have several things to cover. I do need to add this real quick before we move. I should have added it earlier. But before we move on to our next section, here's another frothing at the mouth statement from Brownie. GOP party platform. Fork the poor, and number 2, fork the middle class and blame it on the poor. Now, Dave, see the previous videos I've referenced it in the first clip minutes ago. Now, Dave, Do you know the effective income tax rate for millionaires from going decade by decade from the 1950s until now? Do you know the effective income tax rate after transfers of all income quintiles from the 1950s through today and how that's changed? Do ya? No, you don't. So I would look at those videos and you'll probably find out. In fact, I'll just give it part of it to you here. About 45%, basically the bottom two quintiles. Now, there are some people in those quintiles that do actually have a positive tax rate, but most of them don't. Overall, those bottom two quintiles, and for you, Dave, you retard, that's 20%. That's putting them in 5 groups, you moron. Those bottom two have a negative tax rate. About 45% of all federal income tax filers have absolutely zero income tax liability, which I'm all for poor people not paying taxes. I would either have a flat income tax with a zeroed out rate to say $17,500 and scuttle all these deferments for 401k, health savings accounts, tax credits for child care, all this crap, and or maybe expand it to $20,000. Don't give employers a tax break for health insurance. Give it to the individual. But I would rather have that, or a flat consumption tax, which is a lot better than this convoluted system we have now that you know nothing about, Dave, because you have not looked at any of the data. You just another generalized, angry, frothing at the mouth, retard screed from you. So again, see those videos. I have all the detailed information. And old Fart Rants won't go over it because his videos are short, even if, basically, if you count even his stupid little intro and all his, hey everybody, how you doing? And this crap he puts on at the end to look funny. His videos are maybe 3 minutes at the most. It's better than NyQuil, though. It'll put you to sleep. So see those videos, and your talking point there has been debunked. Have a nice day, Dave.
While everybody's attention was on the bombings in Boston, another kind of terrorism was going on in Washington, D.C. Thanks to a Republican filibuster, a moderate, bipartisan bill to expand existing background checks and close loopholes for gun purchases, supported by 90% of the American people, failed to pass the Senate, even though the vote was 54 to 46. Of course, Republican and Tea Party obstructionists and the NRA claim this blatant attack on democracy as a victory for them because, patriotism and freedom. Since when did a minority vote in complete opposition to the will of an overwhelming majority of the American people become patriotic? Since the Republicans and the T-Tard turd blossoms took over the House, they have done absolutely nothing to create jobs, which, as we all remember, is what they campaigned on and say that they've been laser focused on every day since. What a load of bullshit. All they've done is pass anti-abortion laws, filibuster more than all Congresses in history put together, filibuster more than all Congresses in history put together, filibuster more than all Congresses in history put together.
First, let's deal with Dave's senile rage on filibusters, which is copied verbatim from Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. I'm tired about hearing how we live in a democracy. This is not a democracy. Maybe some retard who barely passed through a decaying inner city public school would believe that. But what's Bernie's excuse? We know Dave's excuse. He's an idiot, an uneducated idiot. Never mind. If we're a democracy, then why did the founders ensconce the Electoral College in the Constitution? Why do North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming have the same number of U.S. senators as New York, Florida, and California? Why do treaties require 2/3 for ratification? Why does Congress need 2/3 in each chamber to override an executive veto? Why did they make the Constitution so difficult to amend? If they wanted a democracy, they would not have created 2 chambers of Congress, and they certainly wouldn't have allowed us to throw members out of the People's House every 2 years. In addition, they would not, although this was changed by the 17th Amendment, in addition, they would not have senators appointed by state legislatures. Why does the executive branch, according to the Constitution, have so little power? All the justices the president appoints have to be christened by the Senate. All his cabinet heads have to be approved by the Senate. He can't even spend a dime sans congressional permission. In conclusion, we do not live in a democracy, Bernie, or you, Dave. We do not live in a democracy, so please quit repeating this talking point because it's simply rubbish. Now let's look at the history of the Senate cloture rule. And I had a screenshot of where this all is at, and I'll leave a link for that if you people want to learn something. Now let's look at the history of the Senate cloture rule and see if Bernie or Dave have a clue what they're talking about. Quote, Woodrow Wilson considered himself an expert on Congress, the subject of his 1884 doctoral dissertation. When he became president in 1913, he announced his plans to be a legislator-in-chief and requested that the president's room in the Capitol be made ready for his weekly consultations with committee chairmen. For a few months, Wilson kept to that plan. Remember, Dave, this is back in 1913, dummy. So long ago, you weren't even around. Soon, however, traditional legislative executive branch antagonisms began to tarnish this optimism. Oh, you mean the Senate wasn't just a rubber stamp? Back then, oh my gosh. After passing major tariff, trade, and banking legislation in the first 2 years of his administration, Congress slowed its pace. End quote. Wilson's ambitions are admirable. Get with Congress and try to hammer out stuff that will appease most senators, which will possibly, take that with a grain of salt, which will possibly appease the majority of America. And hopefully that majority doesn't have their hands out begging for a handout. Wilson had huge majorities in Congress. This is important for his first term. He had a huge majority in the Senate until his final 2 years, and as a lot of two-term presidents have found out, America turns on you and hands control of Congress to someone else. And then the party that got control handed to them after ruining the country for 8 years says, look, we got a mandate to do what we want. And then it goes back 8 years again later. Just look at all the huge swings in control we've had in Congress just in the last 13 years. I think you need to look down the ballot, but not to get off track. Even prior to Wilson and the Democrats losing the House, they had a hard time passing legislation. Quote, by 1915, the Senate had become a breeding ground for filibusters. It's un-American and terrorism. In the final weeks of the Congress that ended on March 4th, one administration measure related to the war in Europe and tied the Senate up for 33 days and blocked passage of 3 major appropriations bills. 2 years later, as pressure increased for American entry into that war, a 23-day end-of-session filibuster against the president's proposal to arm merchant ships also failed, taking with it much other essential legislation. For the previous 40 years, efforts in the Senate to pass a debate-limiting rule had come to nothing. Now, in the wartime crisis environment, President Wilson lost his patience. End quote. Oh, you mean the Senate wasn't a rubber stamp back then? We're going to get into some senile rage about terrorism. They're terrorizing the Senate by filibustering. This never happened. Well, if you're a senile idiot, you probably believe that. Democrats had a stranglehold on Congress, yet filibusters weren't common. Say it isn't so. Bernie and Harry Reid's crusade is nothing new, talking about their crusade against the filibuster in 2014. If we could resurrect long-dead senators from the late 19th century and early 20th, they could probably talk for hours on their frustrations due to not being able to hammer out or codify something related to breaking filibusters. This is nothing new, Bernie, or you, Dave. History didn't begin when Oboingo became president. Might be hard to believe. Wilson isn't the first and won't be the last president who complained about obstruction from Congress. And this is the way the founders intended it. They didn't intend Congress to be a rubber stamp, and they didn't intend to allow a fleeting supermajority to run roughshod. Not that the Constitution has ever stopped an egomaniacal executive branch that has a phone and a pen. They didn't intend Congress to be a rubber stamp, and they didn't intend to allow a fleeting supermajority to run roughshod over we the people. Quote, decades earlier, he had written in his doctoral dissertation, "It is the proper duty of a representative body to look diligently into every affair of government and talk much about what it sees." On March 4th, 1917, as the 64th Congress expired without completing its work, Wilson held a decidedly different view, calling the situation unparalleled. This is unparalleled. Are you listening, Dave, you retard? He stormed that the Senate of the United States is the only legislative body in the world which cannot act when its majority is ready for action. A little group of willful men representing no opinion but their own have rendered the great government of the United States helpless and contemptible. The Senate, he demanded, must adopt a cloture rule. End quote. Bernie and Dave need a history lesson. The Obozo presidency, the Bush presidency, etc., weren't the first instances of opposition party engaging in, quote, obstructionism, end quote. The definition of obstructionism to a beltway reptile differs depending on if their party is in control of Congress and or the White House. If your party controls the Senate and the White House, the other party is obstructing. If the opposite party is in control of the Senate and White House, then you're just saving America from a throng of authoritarians. Film at 11. Quote, on March 8th, 1917, an especially called session of the 65th Congress, the Senate agreed to a rule that essentially preserved its tradition of unlimited debate. The rule required a two-thirds majority to end debate. Two-thirds majority to end debate, and permitted each member to speak for an additional hour after that before voting on final passage. Over the next 46 years, the Senate managed to invoke cloture on only 5 occasions. As you can see, the cloture requirement is as embedded in the Senate as white blood cells in the human body, at least until 1914. The Senate, again until at least 2014, unless you were doing something via budget reconciliation, the Senate has always required more than a simple majority for virtually everything. Not always, but the vast majority of the time, so this whining about obstructionism is from folks who either don't understand the history of the Senate or are just butthurt that they can't ram a socialist agenda down our throats. Over those 46 years, the Senate had 34 cloture motions filed, only 5 where cloture was invoked. That's a meager 14.7% success rate. For what it's worth, let's take a look at various periods of time. Remember the previous one we just covered and see how cloture votes evolved. When Ronald Reagan ascended to the Oval Office, Republicans controlled the Senate for his first 6 years in office, January 81 through January 87, 97 through 99th Congress. And then Democrats took over. For the 97th and 99th Congress, through those 3, 97, 98, 99, 113 cloture motions were filed, 69 cloture votes were held, and cloture was invoked 30 times, a 26.5% success rate. The same totals for the 94th through 96th Congress. Democrats held the majority were 92 cloture motions filed, 61 cloture votes held, and 30 cloture was invoked 30 times, a 32.6% success rate. Obstructionism. By whom? The side that is filibustering will claim they are saving America from authoritarianism, and the majority is filing for cloture to squelch debate. The majority will say the minority are obstructionists. Prior to the 92nd Congress, cloture motions never even hit double digits. Then it began to change rapidly. From the 91st through 94th Congress, Nixon, Ford, Democrats in the majority, the totals were 114, 84, and 30, a 26.3% success rate. For the 104th through 106th Congress, Bill Clinton, Republican majority, the totals are 222 cloture motions filed, 161 cloture votes taken, and 55 times cloture was invoked, 24.7% success rate. For the 111th through 113th Congress, bozo, Democrats in the majority in the Senate, the totals are 504 cloture motions filed, 382 cloture votes held, 291 cloture times cloture was invoked, 57.7% success rate. For the 107th through 109th Congress, W. Bush, Republican majority most of the time, and I've got a link to a note there you need to read. Republican majority most of the time. Totals are 201 motions for cloture filed, 164 cloture votes held, and cloture was invoked 80 times. Only a 39.8% success rate. So bad, even Shaq's free throw stats are much better. For the 101st and 102nd Congress, George Herbert Walker Bush, Democrat majority, the totals are 98 cloture motions filed, 72 cloture votes held, and cloture was invoked 34 times, a 34.7% success rate. And again, at the link that I put up on the screen, I've got all this written down for you. As you can see, since the 91st Congress, motions for cloture have drastically increased, even if the party majority in the Senate is not the party in the White House. Until the old Boingo era, most of the time they didn't have a lot of success. Remember, Harry Reid and the Democrats essentially ended the filibuster in the 113th Congress. Motions to invoke cloture skyrocketed. Until the old Boingo era, most of the time they didn't have a lot of success. And look for this trend to continue. One man's filibuster is another man's obstructionism. Remember, Democrat majorities in the Senate adopted the filibuster rule in 1917. They changed it in 1975 when Ford was in the White House, and Harry Reid did it again in late 2013. Harry Reid and the Democrats changed the rule in 2014, but didn't use it on Supreme Court justices, and I'd wager if someone had resigned or died in January 2014, they would have tried to get Boingo's nominee through with less than 60 votes. They didn't use it on Supreme Court nominees. Since that glass ceiling was broken and Pandora's box has been opened, anyone with any intelligence knew that eventually filibusters would be busted permanently. Color me not surprised that Republicans use those tactics to confirm Neil Gorsuch. It's the world we live in now. A lockstep 51-seat majority in the Senate will now be in total control. I'd wager Senate Democrats and Democrats en masse are regretting that. Get used to it, folks. Unless we get another gang of 14 at the beginning of a new Congress to hammer out our deal, this is what is going to occur every Congress, especially if the Senate majority and the White House are of the same political stripe. I certainly would support amending the Constitution and requiring 60 votes, 3/5 majority of all senators duly chosen and sworn to end debate on any and all federal judgeships. I would also support making Supreme Court appointments good for only 20 to 25 years. That would guarantee that a two-term president would not have one of his justices replaced by his successor unless the person died, of course. I would also resigned. I would also support amending the Constitution requiring a 3/5 majority to confirm any cabinet positions. If you want to limit these Senate pissing contests, this is what you need to do. There were rumblings back in 2005 that Republicans would use the nuclear option, which is and was completely legal, but didn't. I supported them doing that in the case of a Supreme Court vacancy, but I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad Harry Reid and the Democrats were the first to break that rule, so-called rule. Again, I support amending the Constitution requiring 60 votes, 3/5 majority of all senators duly chosen and sworn to end any debate on any and all federal judgeships. Limit the Supreme Court justices to 20 to 25 years, and then they're gone. That would guarantee a two-term president who put somebody on the Supreme Court would not have any of his or her appointments replaced by his successor unless their appointee resigned or died. I would also support, again, requiring our 3/5 majority to confirm any cabinet positions. So whoever's Secretary of Defense would need 60 votes. 3/5 of all senators duly chosen and sworn. I would be remiss if I did not mention that Harry Reid preemptively filed for cloture after the 60-vote threshold on cabinet nominees and bench nominations below the Supreme Court were scuttled. This was an effort to shorten debate depending on which side you're on. Maybe unethical, but totally legal. Reid also engaged in a tactic which is not a new tactic called filling the amendment tree to keep opposition amendments to a minimum. Again, maybe not ethical, but totally legal. Old Fart Rants will now spend the next 15 minutes on Wikipedia reading about filling the amendment tree and become an expert on it. Maybe he'll even upload a video trying to convince you that he's known about it for decades. As for Dave's claim that Republicans filibustered since they took over the House in 2010 midterm elections, which would be the 112th and 113 Congresses. As for Dave's claim that Republicans filibustered more than all Congresses in history put together, no. If we use cloture motions filed as our yardstick, there were 367 of those in the 112th and 113th Congresses. Democrats controlled the Senate, the GOP controlled the House. 367 cloture motions filed. All previous Congresses combined, the cloture motions filed total, all previous Congresses combined, the cloture motions filed total comes to a whopping 1,262 motions filed for cloture prior to the 112th Congress in history. I don't know what this retard is smoking, but it must be really good. Maybe in Dave's world, 367 is greater than 1,262. But he is an uneducated idiot. He probably flunked general math too. And that concludes our section on the filibuster.
So why doesn't John Boehner get off his lazy ass and just impeach King Hussein already? Nothing will turn out Democratic voters in November like a good impeachment hearing. I mean, we all remember how badly it hurt Bill Clinton, the most popular ex-president in U.S. history, right? We're counting on you to light a fire under the typically apathetic Democratic midterm voters to turn out in November and vote your kind out of any positions of power in Washington, D.C. once and for all. You betcha. Those of us with functioning brains know that if Obama or Hillary, if she had won the election, did 1% of what so-called President Trump has done, they'd be impeached so fast it'd make your head swim. It's obvious that Trump should be, and probably will be eventually, impeached. Then what? Well, here's the bad news. Here are the people who would be next in line for the presidency if Paul Ryan was eliminated by the exact same thing he's made of.
I had to mention this real quick to close this section. It's kind of funny that you could basically, Dave was saying the same things he's saying now he would have rejected if someone said it about Obama during his presidency. It's kind of funny. But when he's reading off the names of everybody in presidential succession there, you can tell you're trying to look at the camera, or your face is towards the camera, but your eyeballs are moving off to the right because you're trying to read off of a teleprompter. Good production value there, Dave. But I did want to say, also, thank you for taking my suggestion to move the camera away from your face. You remember when you used to like have it right up in your face? Except I said move the camera about a half a mile away. But anyway, that concludes this section. And again, you could just take everything he said, and every time he says Paul Ryan, you could say Pelosi or Boehner. Every time he says Trump, you could say Obama. He's just, but it's amazing how he's in generalized fashion accepting the same things about Trump, who I didn't vote for, that he would have rejected for Obama. And, of course, he's just talking about impeachment, and he fills up this video with just reading off this teleprompter because there's not really much substance to it. He doesn't have much substance. The old fella doesn't know much. Well, that concludes this part. We got another section of Old Fart Rants versus Old Fart Rants coming up in 1 second. The next part in the Old Fart Rants versus himself saga that we're going to cover, the main part here will be, at first he wanted me to debate his viewers, and because he sent him over to my channel, then I started debating him. We'll get to that. The reason he uploaded this giant moron award is I decimated him on his own channel, and then he had to block me. You remember he was complaining about Wild Bill for America blocking him, and parading around and like strutting like a peacock because Wild Bill blocked him. Well, you blocked me, dude, because I was owning you on your own channel. Notice he had to go back and update it over 4 years later. But this would come back to this yes-no question, and he still uses this a lot in debates with me. He'll go by, you can't answer this yes-no question. Yes, see what's up on your screen there. I have debunked that, and what Old Fart Rants will do is he'll say, it's boring, it's too long. He's actually asked for a summary. He's asked me for a summary on detailed stuff. No, I can't give you the mouth breather 3-sentence summary. You're just going to have to respond to it. Just like I've responded to a lot of your videos where you'll throw out 10 things at once and I'll smash 5 of them. And then he'll get mad because I didn't do the other 5. So that's one thing he'll do. But let's get to now what he said in his video about his viewers and sending them over to my channel, because what happened after that, I said, well, you know what, I'm going to start debating his ADHD sheep. And I started recording what they would say, and he blew a gasket. Well, let's get to that real quick.
And now that I've exposed you, I can't wait to see how you spin your epic fail into a win in your scathing review of me on your website. Meanwhile, my viewers are smart and savvy, and some of them might be coming over to your channel to congratulate you because you just won the Old Fart Rants Giant Moron Award.
You see, folks, he wanted me to debate him. So I started debating his idiots, and he threw a hissy fit. Take a look at the screenshot on your screen. This was part of I have this uploaded on Facebook, this entire debate. It was about stand your ground laws, and he posted this video as a response to anything I'll ever say or ever said and ever will say. Sounds like he wants out of a debate. Well, you plug that URL into your browser and you get the Smell the Roses Poopy video. So I'll put the screenshot for that up and the screenshot of his comments that he put underneath that video, that he didn't name this person, but you actually did, dummy. You're not too bright, are you? Another thing that'll make old Fart Rants mad, he makes a lot of claims in there, like I had views taken away in a video. He didn't provide any screenshots. Whenever he says something, make him provide screenshots. And as far as some website over at Flickr, I don't own a website over at Flickr, little feller. I know people who do, but I don't. So if you want to put up screenshots of that Flickr website, we can debate whose it is. But I don't know what you're talking about there, Gramps. So let's get to some comments just real quick again, since I've already put up the screenshot where he posts a link to the poopy video to me. Now, the reason he did that too is he used to refer to me as kooky. That was kind of his way of referring to me to where everybody would know who he's talking about. But he thought it would thwart me, but it didn't. So he had to think of a new name, and it went from kooky to poopy. And I think it's weird for you to be talking about poopy. I just think that's kind of weird, especially for you.
There's a certain YouTuber who I think epitomizes the damage that religious and political propaganda can do, who just so happens to also be my most prolific stalker. And the timing couldn't be better because he just posted his 28th video about me. He has a channel called YouTube Poop Inspector. Now that's not the real name because I don't want to give him any publicity. I'll just call him Poopy. Over 3 years ago, in a debate about religion on my channel, I asked Poopy a simple yes or no question, and he couldn't answer it. Well, he flipped out and he started attacking me, so I blocked him and gave him a giant moron award. All this just because he couldn't answer a question every bit as simple and easy as, do you know where your keys are? So he plays his own videos over and over and trolls YouTube channels, including some of my viewers' channels, bad-mouthing me and begging for views. So some of you might know who I'm talking about.
I think that'll suffice. I find it funny when old Fart Rants complains about insults. Yes, I'm going to insult you, and then I'm going to refute you, and then I'm going to insult you some more and refute you some more. But I thought you wanted me to debate your sheep. You said some of them are going to come over and congratulate me. And I took them on. So, I don't know, maybe you should think twice before running your mouth. So, I mean, if you want to watch that whole, he even covers my website later a little bit, but he puts and I know my eyes are a lot better than his, but he puts it out so far, he makes it so small that you can hardly tell what it says. Another thing, his longest videos are when he has my material to work with. So what he does is, for example, he'll say, Kooky says I don't know what, or Poopy, excuse me, it's Poopy in this one. Poopy says I don't know what an assault weapon is. Well, you don't, because I recorded a bunch of your comments when I quizzed you in a real-time debate that you say we never do. I quizzed you in a real-time debate on assault weapons, and that's all he says in the video. Kooky says I don't know what an assault weapon is, and then he just moves on. So you see how he's doing this? He's not engaging. But I thought that was funny, Dave, that you did that clandestine video to me. You sound like a guy who really wants out of the debate, but I don't know, who does 30-some videos about Sarah Palin? Oh, Sarah Palin's an easy target, I see. Okay, well, who does hundreds of videos like you with hardly any references in them? I mean, you've made all kinds of claims in your videos and you don't reference the stuff. That's because you're lazy and stupid. And one last thing I think we should get to before we get to the main event on this, which will be a quick fisking of his video right after the election. When Romney lost in 2012, and I didn't vote for Mitt, you told America, or people who opposed Obama, to shut the F up or get the F out. Well, why don't you take your own advice? Your guy didn't win. Shut your stinking gob, Gramps. So, you're a hypocrite. You tell people, of course, you're not going to make anybody shut up, least of all me. So, take your own advice. Shut your mouth or get out of my country. Last piece of business. Old Fart Rants' Idiocracy video. Go watch it all for yourself. I'll put in some stuff. You know what? If I'd known this was going to cause you this much grief, I almost would have voted for Trump. But I didn't. And I won't, because I realize, and I know this will piss off a lot of people, but I'm not here to make friends. Well, I got a few friends. I'm not here to be a yes man. Trump's going to do a lot of the same things Obama did, but you're going to ignore it. Dave gives some good advice. Yeah, stay stoned. Yeah, that's some real good advice. Dave, is your point about pot being legal in California? I predicted when it was legalized that they would eventually regulate it and tax it into oblivion, that the black market will continue to prosper, and that will happen. So notice how he legalized pot. What are you going to do? You can start giving away free pot to people who want pot but can't afford to smoke it. So, wow, this guy's just horrible advice. Horrible advice. But, Brownie, before I get to a few short clips from your stupidity, how come you didn't mention the Patriot Act in that video? Huh? How come you didn't mention drone attacks on American citizens? Oh, that's because you made excuses for that. Oh, yeah, Obama murdered American citizens with drones, but you found it in your heart to make excuses for him. I'm sorry. Nothing about the Obama administration defending the Bush administration in court over warrantless wiretapping. Al Haramain? Look that up. Go ahead and Google that since you Google everything else, you dumbass. What about the Hussein administration arguing in court that you didn't put a GPS on someone's car without a warrant? Oh, you didn't mention that either. What about undeclared wars in Libya and Syria? Oh, you didn't mention that. It must not be a big deal anymore, right? Because we're not going to hear you about whine and moan about it during Trump then, right? Okay. The Iraq War, Obama supposedly ended it. Then it went south again, and then he said, I never said that. But anyway, we're still in Iraq. We're still in Afghanistan. We're still using overseas contingency operations as a slush fund to get over the Budget Control Act caps. You didn't mention that either. You said the founders are rolling in their grave. What about, can Congress pass legislation forcing people to go to the dentist twice a year? I've asked you this before. Let's get to some short clips here. This is hilarious.
The Supreme Court being handed over to fascists who will use the Constitution for toilet paper for decades to come.
That's funny that you should mention that, Dave, because I gave you a little quiz on the Constitution on election night. And I think he's mentioning some of these things because he knew I was recording it. But I have the timestamps on it when I took those screenshots on November 7th. So I think he tried to upload this as kind of a way to undercut me because he knew I had the screenshots. Wow, you're really worried about the Constitution. The government can all of a sudden tax somebody. Of course, Obamacare, it was a penalty, and then the Supreme Court, the Obama administration argued it was a penalty, and then all of a sudden, it became a tax, and that was okay. Wow. How about Obama losing more times 9-0 at the Supreme Court than George W. Bush and Bill Clinton combined? I think you may want to rethink that. But I gave Old Fart Rants a constitutional quiz on a bunch of things he didn't know, and he couldn't answer them. So when he talks about the Constitution, again, that's just a generalized statement by him to make you think he's intelligent when he is not. And that link will be below the video.
8 years of fighting for liberty and justice and equality for all down the drain.
Remember, though, a lot of social justice requires someone else's wallet. So Old Fart Rants is all for liberty, as long as your wallet is available for it, you know. Like on his Medicare, when you're getting more, the average Medicare recipient gets more than 200% out of Medicare than they paid in. That's liberty and justice for, well, it's a good deal if you're not paying for it. So, sorry about that. I don't know how loud that was. Liberty and justice requires someone else's wallet.
Millions of sick people thrown under the bus.
Hey, Brownie, what about all the people who aren't sick but have to pay for mandates on health insurance for smoking cessation? Because I'm not a smoker. I'm not a chain smoker. I'm not a smoker. But if smoking cessation is required to be covered, that's going to raise costs. What about mental health parity? What if I'm, totally normal, by golly? And I'd rather not have that added cost. Oh, am I selfish if I don't want to pay premiums on a bunch of crap I'm never going to use? How about mammograms? Now, men do get breast cancer. It's rare. It does happen. But I'm not going to need that. And I know if you say, well, it shouldn't be mandated, Dave will take that as you don't want women to get mammograms. No, I just don't want to add a bunch of costs to my premiums. You know what I mean, Dave? Drug counseling. I don't do drugs. Don't go to the psychiatrist. Don't do anything. So, but if that's covered, it has to be covered. Guess what? Well, you've never created a job in your life or had to make a payroll, so you don't understand this. Those added costs, you'll have to get them back somewhere. So, the heck with the people who don't smoke and don't sit around drinking beer all the time and don't do drugs. Those poor, stupid, healthy people that aren't older than dirt. So if I'm under 40 and totally healthy, I get to pay for a bunch of health care I'm not going to use. Makes sense. As far as sick people, what about all the people on Medicaid, Dave, that can't find a doctor because the doctors don't want to deal with Medicaid because of the price controls for it? Are they getting thrown on the bus because they can't find a doctor because of Medicaid's price controls? Oh.
And it could get worse. Trump will be on trial for fraud and racketeering later this month. And if he's convicted, I think even Republicans should push for his impeachment. Say hello to President Pence, a man who thinks gays should be arrested for applying for a marriage license.
And this will be it. Dave, I asked you many moons ago, since we're liberalizing marriage, and I mentioned this in the video a couple years before the decision was handed down, the Hodges decision was handed down by the Supreme Court. If we're going to liberalize marriage, then voluntary incestuous marriages should be allowed. Yes, sick. Yes, disgusting. Yes, immoral. But doing heroin and snorting cocaine is also bad, and so is prostitution. But I'm not going to stop my neighbor from doing that if he wants to do it, so long as he doesn't, do it in front of me. I don't want to see that. But I asked you, should we then get the state out of marriage totally? And if someone wants to have an incestuous marriage, that would be the solution, get the state out of marriage. It should be. I think that's why the founders didn't put anything in it about the Constitution. They didn't want the government to have any control of it. And polygamy, 4 men want to marry 3 women, have a big old marriage collective. Why not? Well, see, he still wants the state in marriage. That's why. But I asked Old Fart Rants several times if he really wanted to liberalize marriage, and he ran away. In fact, he logged out. I think he pretended he was. He just stayed away until I had to go to bed because, I have to work, and he, doesn't do much. That's kind of funny that you wouldn't truly liberalize marriage, man. I thought you were a liberal. So I think he still wants the state to control marriage just for what he wants, though. Because polygamy and if there was a weirdo Obama supporter, I forget his name now. He was having sex with his daughter. So there's going to be some people that want to do it. So that'll do it. And I think that's really hypocritical of you. And that's why I ask you stuff like that, Old Fart Rants, because it exposes you as the idiot that you are. I hope everybody enjoyed this thorough fisking and debunking. It was a pleasure.
Calls me a troglodyte.
I think you're a louse. You're an idiot.